Good evening, everyone. The Altadena Historical Society welcomes you to our presentation. Our mission is to preserve the past, to honor those who have gone before, and to ensure that important events and people are not forgotten. Since 1935, the Society has gathered, preserved, and helped to publicize names and places in an area steeped in history. We want to encourage your interest, your curiosity, and knowledge of events and people who have shaped this area we love. For our presentation tonight, we have Richard Bale with us to show us some trains, trolleys, and automobiles. In the summer of 1939, Richard Bale moved with his mother from his home Montreal, Canada, to Altadena, where he lived with his grandparents on Marengo Avenue near Sacramento Street. The family lived briefly at 40 West Harriet Street, and then purchased a home at 2675 Highview Avenue, just below Mariposa. As a newspaper delivery boy, Richard became familiar with many of the streets and homes in central Altadena. He attended Altadena Elementary School, Elliott Junior High, and shortly after graduating from John Muir High School in 1950, he was drafted to serve in the Korean War. He left Altadena then, but his memories have stayed with him. Richard Bale has written 7 books and numerous articles relating to family heritage, naval history, railroad history, and model railroading. His memories of growing up in the 1940s, titled An Altadena Boyhood, was published by the Altadena Historical Society in 2019 and is now available on our website for sale, in case you're... He was a senior executive at Price Club Costco headquarters in San Diego when he retired in 1995. Richard and his wife, Barbara, now live in Oceanside, where they enjoy a rich family life. They have 8 children and 26 grand and great-grandchildren, most of whom live near him. So that's about Richard, and we'll get started here in just a moment, but first some logistics. It is likely that you may have questions. What we'd like to do is have you submit questions to me on your chat at utility, which is the bottom of the screen here. If you scroll down, you can see a chat utility. Send that to me or to everybody if you want, and we will line them up for answering questions at the end of the presentation. Let's see, I'll read the questions myself, and Dick will answer them as best he can. Finally, though, you all need to know that this presentation has been set up with the essential support of our wonderful Altadena library, especially Chloe Cavalier, who is operating the slideshow behind the scenes tonight. So we have a deep gratitude for the library, as usual. And I think we're ready to go here. So let's see. And let's see. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So, so Dick, go ahead. And Chloe, can we cue up the slideshow? There we go.
Well, thank you very much, Eric. And thank you also to the Altadena Historical Society for inviting me to participate in this evening's program. And of course, thanks also to Chloe of the Altadena Library for facilitating this Zoom event. When looking at public and private transportation in Altadena, whether it's 100 years ago or whether it's today, it's kind of impossible to ignore Pasadena. Whether we like it or not, that's the big elephant in the room. By the late 1880s, Pasadena had become a well-established community of almost 5,000 people. Altadena's population was perhaps a few hundred, and the transportation needs of the two communities was, as you can imagine, significantly different. So let's get started. We have the next slide, please. Before the arrival of electric streetcars, neighborhoods with limited ridership were served by small horse-drawn cars. The cars had flanged wheels riding on light steel rail. Some attempts were made to make them look like electric trolleys, which they were not. By 1880, a network of horse-drawn rail cars like this provided public transportation to Pasadena citizens. The bulk of the local population, Pasadena's population, lived between Villa and California Street, and the horse-drawn cars that served them didn't get anywhere near Altadena. The letterboard, by the way, on this rail car reads Los Robles and California Streets. The first public transportation into Altadena was launched in 1886 when a car similar to this one, operated from the Painter Hotel at Fair Oaks and Washington Street, it went up to the Mountain View Cemetery. Fair Oaks, it got a little steep in some places, so 2 mules were required to haul this little car up to the cemetery. The next slide, please. The first powered transportation into Altadena was introduced in 1887. It consisted of this 1-car steam railroad that also operated from the Painter Hotel. It was really just a tourist line offering a round trip to the Arroyo Seco. Hiking was very popular in that period, and many hikers rode the little steam line to get closer to the foothills. Next, please. Funded largely by wealthy Altadena residents, George Green and his Mariposa neighbor, Andrew McNally, the Pasadena-Altadena Steam Railway was completed in 1888. The line extended from a bit south of the Pasadena Green Hotel, north on the west side of Lincoln Avenue to what is now Harriet Street. So from the west side of Altadena, the tracks went straight across town, terminating at Lake Avenue just north of Calaveras. The train ride in their private railway cars was smoother and far less dusty than the horse-drawn carriages previously used by Green and McNally. The steam train carried both passenger and some freight, but the schedule was somewhat unpredictable since the departure times were at the whim of the owners, Green and McNally. Next slide, please. The Mount Low attraction, which opened in 1893, included a small electric trolley that operated from Mountain Station at Lake and Calaveras to the base of the Mount Low incline in Rubio Canyon. In addition to riding in the Pasadena-Altadena Steam Railway, tourists arrived at the mountain station aboard tally-ho carriages that were operated by various hotels in Pasadena. 8 horses were required to pull a big tally-ho carriage up Lake Avenue all the way to Altadena. With just 10 to 12 passengers, tally-hos were not very cost effective. Next. About 1894 or 95, the horse-drawn car to Mountain View Cemetery was rebuilt as an electric trolley. I call them trolleys, but it's, a small streetcar, it's the same thing. At the same time, the trolley line was extended through the cemetery and up Raymond Avenue to Mariposa, where it headed east, terminating at Lake Avenue. The service was cheap, frequent, and clean. Altadena's first electric trolley ended the need for tally-hos, and it killed passenger traffic on the steam railroad. Next. This is Lake and Mariposa in 1895. The letterboard on these cards reads to Altadena and Mount Low. On weekends, hundreds of people visited the Mount Low attraction each day, with the vast majority being delivered by electric trolleys. Altadena residents could ride the trolley for local trips, but on weekends, the cars were often filled to capacity when the cars arrived at the local stops. Next. Various types of private streetcars were available for charter. This private hearse trolley, operated by Lippincot's Funeral Parlor of Pasadena, offered charter service to transport an entire funeral party, including the deceased, to Mountain View Cemetery. The hearse trolley was suitably draped with black curtains and somber bunting. The service was inaugurated in 1897 and continued into the late teens. Next. During the heyday of the electric trolley, excursion or party cars were also available for charter. Shown here in the 1890s is Poppy, a popular excursion trolley that made numerous trips into Altadena. Poppy was festively decorated with hundreds of small electric lights. Now remember, this is in the 1890s when a lot of communities had yet to receive electrical power or lights. Excursion trolleys were popular with all types of organizations, including church groups, fraternal lodges, and in this case, a bicycle club. Next. Fires, soaring reconstruction costs, and escalating operating expenses forced the Mount Low operation into receivership in 1899. Henry Huntington of San Marino, who controlled Pacific Electric, acquired the Mount Low attraction and all of the trolley systems throughout the greater Los Angeles area. Pacific Electric moved the Altadena line from Raymond over to Fair Oaks on the west side of the Mountain View Cemetery. At the same time, the new line was double tracked from Chester to Mariposa and on east to Lake Avenue. The four-wheel trolleys on the line were replaced with 40-foot, two-truck streetcars. They had open sides and were well suited to Southern California weather. Visitors from the east loved these open cars and they dubbed them California cars. Next. Here's a California car leaving the base of Mount Low Incline in the early 1900s. It will travel down Lake Avenue to Mariposa, then west to Fair Oaks and onto the Pacific Electric Terminal at 6th and Main in downtown Los Angeles. Double tracking on Mariposa and Fair Oaks was later needed to handle the weekend growth, all the crowds that were visiting Mount Low. Next. I don't mean to gloss over Mount Low, but there are some experts in the Historical Society who know much more about it, and within itself, it's a wonderful subject to explore. So we're just kind of briefing over it tonight. Beginning in 1911, the open California cars were replaced with large enclosed interurban red cars that could be used anywhere on the Pacific Electric system. Service from LA to Mount Low was hourly. This red car, northbound on Lake, begins a turn onto private right-of-way at Newkirk, which is near today's Las Flores Drive. Note the large poles down the middle of Lake that support the overhead trolley wire. As an aid to motorcar drivers, the poles are painted with black and white reflective paint. Next. This is Lake in Mariposa in the mid-1920s. Webster's Pharmacy is on the left, and to the right is the La Mariposa Hotel. Note that Mariposa is divided with raised tracks in the middle of the street. Next. This wonderful photo of Lake in Mariposa was taken in 1938 by Ernest Leo, who lived on nearby Berry Place. For me, the photo tells many interesting stories. By 1920, the popularity of private automobiles severely reduced local trolley ridership. To cut growing losses, Pacific Electric replaced large two-man streetcars with small four-wheel Bernie cars. They were cheap to operate and required only one motorman. The little Bernie streetcar on the left, on the far left, has just arrived at Lake from Fair Oaks. It's still on the south tracks, but the motorman has already moved the trolley pole to the face of the rear so that when it travels westbound, it'll pick up the electricity behind it. The motorman is waiting for the Mount Low car to pass. On the right, the large Mount Low car has just come down from Rubio Canyon. It's now turning onto Lake, it's now turning from Lake onto Mariposa. It will pass the Bernie and can continue on to downtown Los Angeles. It would be followed by the Bernie, who will make all the local stops. The black dots in the sky are specialized fixtures that hold a powered trolley wire above the center of the curved tracks. I love this photo. Next. Photographed in the late 1930s, this Pacific Electric steel interurban red car, which is not a Mount Low car, crosses Santa Rosa on its way downtown to downtown Los Angeles. Note the wigwag traffic signal on the left, just above the crossbuck. Also note the flashing light hanging over the center of the intersection. Both signals warn motorists on Santa Rosa that the streetcar has the right of way and will not stop. Next. In 1940, the big red car cruises down the middle of Mariposa. This is near Santa Anita. Mariposa is a 2-lane road with a raised railroad right-of-way down the middle. Note the passenger loading platform near the center of the photo. Next. Small Bernie streetcar, westbound on Mariposa, completes the S-curve between Scripps Place and Raymond Avenue. The date is January 10th, 1941. The raised double track down the middle of Mariposa is clearly shown. The only north-south streets where you could cross Mariposa were at Marengo, Santa Anita, Santa Rosa, and El Molino. Before being double tracked to Fair Oaks, the trolley came to Raymond and turned east onto Mariposa. Photographer E. Wright, who is elevated, perhaps on a ladder for this photo, is positioned near Highway Avenue. Next. A Bernie streetcar, northbound on Fair Oaks in the 1930s, begins a turn onto Mariposa. The Bernies operated every 10 minutes during morning and evening rush hour, and then slowed to every 20 minutes at other times. Service began at 5:30 a.m. with the last car to Altadena, leaving Colorado and Fair Oaks at 1:30 in the morning. That's pretty good service.
Okay.
On Fair Oaks, the Bernies went up to Montana, with every other car going all the way to Mariposa and east onto Lake Avenue. Note that the rails are embedded in the pavement and the poles down the Fair Oaks have been removed. As I mentioned, this is from the 1930s. In a few years, the gas station at the left will be replaced by Dr. Haynes' medical office, which I believe is still standing.
Yep.
Next picture, please. In this photo dated 1913, a PE red car stops near Ventura Street to pick up a passenger. He's obviously a commuter, and this car, as you can see, is going all the way to Los Angeles. Note that the poles that support the trolley wire are still down the middle of Fair Oaks at this location. Incidentally, that network at the front of the red car that looks kind of like a mattress, that was required by law. I forget the year, but sometime around 1910 or so, all cars operating on the Pacific Electric had to put those passenger catchers on the front of their cars. Presumably they would scoop up a person before they cut him in half, I guess. Next, please. In 1913, a streetcar line was built to serve the growing population on Altadena's east side. The line was built on Mendocino between Lake and Allen. Except for a short passing track near Brayburn Road, it was an out and back single track line. In this 1928 photo, motorman P.J. Murphy takes a break at the Allen end of the line. The route was abandoned in 1932. Next. During much of the 1930s, the northern limit of the Lake Avenue streetcar line was Woodbury Road. The old rail from Woodbury to Mariposa was too light to handle the heavier modern cars. A connecting bus looped around Lake, Mendocino, and New York Drive. Next. In January 1940, buses replaced all the local streetcars in both Altadena and Pasadena. To help folks adjust to the new routes and schedules, both buses and streetcars operated for about a week. Pausing at Fair Oaks, or perhaps posing at Fair Oaks and Montana in January 1940, is a Bernie streetcar and a 9-year-old bus, which is a temporary stand-in pending the arrival of sufficient new GM coaches. One of the new services into Altadena was at Los Robles bus that continued up Santa Anita to Calaveras, where it made a U-turn. Next, please. This is a General Motors coach on the Lincoln Avenue Hill Street route. This photo is from the mid-1940s, and the location is Holliston at about Boston. For the record, for any gearheads who happen to be on board, this is the model TD 2701, manufactured by the Yellow Coach division of General Motors. Next. Local trolley service ended in 1941, but red car service from Pasadena to Los Angeles continued for another 10 years. Altadena photographer J. Allen Hawkins captured several little old ladies in Pasadena venturing into the middle of Colorado Boulevard to board a big Pacific Electric red car. The car's on its way to downtown Los Angeles. It will take the Oak Knoll route through San Marino. Note the sign on the Cornet store in the background. This scene is at Lake in Colorado, and it is in Altadena, but it shows how many Altadenans continue to get to Los Angeles. Before we go into part two, how are we doing on time? Are we all right?
Looks good to me. Yeah. Yeah, it's on 7:22, so I think we're good. Yeah.
Okay, good. So before we go into part two about private automobiles, I'd like to mention something about two streets in Altadena. If you can have a favorite street, mine would be Mariposa. I lived on Highview, a few doors rather, off Mariposa, and I walked, rode my bike, delivered newspapers, and later drove on Mariposa hundreds of times. I always wondered why it was wider than other streets. Was it nice and wide just to accommodate the large estates? If Mariposa was an important thoroughfare, why did it have that big S-curve between Scripps Place and Raymond? Mariposa narrowed and continued beyond both Fair Oaks and Lake, but why didn't those extensions line up with the 4-lane portions of the street? I was always curious about that. After some digging, I came up with a few answers. Earlier, I mentioned that there was an electric trolley that brought tourists from the Mount Low Incline down to Lake and Mariposa. By 1894, it had become obvious that an electric trolley was needed to handle the passengers to and from downtown Pasadena. The easiest way to accomplish this was to extend the trolley line that already went from Pasadena to as far north as the Mountain View Cemetery. From Lake, a single track was built east along what would become Mariposa to what is now Raymond, where it turned south and lined up with the tracks in the cemetery. At the time, everything was in the area was farmland or agriculture for the most part. Mariposa was a dirt road that ended around Marengo, and Raymond Avenue did not exist. The service was better, but it was still inadequate. Did I lose you?
No, we're here. So in 19.
I lost you. I don't see you anymore, but that's fine.
Okay, we're still here.
All right.
Yeah. So about the.
In 1899, to deliver more customers to its recently acquired Mount Low operation, Pacific Electric double-tracked the rails all the way from Lake to Mariposa to its car barn at Fair Oaks and Holly. PE abandoned the tracks in the cemetery and placed the new double tracks on Fair Oaks. The cultivated area along Mariposa included an orange grove on the west side of the Scripps property. To get around the grove, the new double tracks on what became Mariposa made the turn down toward Raymond and then immediately turned west and continued along the south side of the orange grove to Fair Oaks. The result was a gentle S curve that the electric trolleys could handle without slowing down. As Mariposa became established as a thoroughfare, one-way lanes were built along each side of the tracks. Those lanes were later paved. In 1941, when the elevated tracks were removed, Mariposa was graded and repaved as the wide 4-lane road that we know today.
Got it.
The other road that I want to talk about briefly is Harriet. Steam railroads and electric streetcars have very different requirements when it comes to the roadbed, the curves, and the grade or the steepness of the tracks. The steam railroad built across Altadena was carefully surveyed, and the roadbed was built up to eliminate or at least minimize changes in the grade. After those railroad tracks were removed in 1916, the straight and level right-of-way became Harriet Street. If you look at a map, you'll see that Harriet is Altadena's longest straight street. As I mentioned, the roadbed of railroads had to be as level as possible, sometimes requiring considerable fill or buildup. The clearest evidence of built-up roadbed of the Altadena-Pasadena Steam Railroad that is still visible today is the embankment across the playground at Altadena Elementary School.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I do not see anything, but that's all right. We'll keep plowing ahead.
Yeah, it says we're on part 2, private vehicles now, Richard.
Okay, I need slide number 26.
26 is on.
You got it?
Yeah. Do you want 27 with the model?
Not yet.
Okay.
Okay,
Go.
between my own recollections and the fond memories of my schoolmates, neighbors, and a few friends, I was able to gather information on about 100 private cars driven by Altadenans during the first half of the last century. I think we have some time for a quick look, at least a few of them. So now we'll go to slide number 27.
Got it. It's on now.
In 1915, Cadillac introduced a new 70 horsepower V8 engine. What better place to demonstrate the ability of the powerful new car to handle steep hills than Altadena? In this publicity photo taken at the foot of Santa Rosa Avenue, we see a 1915 Cadillac touring car with all of the passenger models dutifully ignoring the camera. There were earlier cars in Altadena, but this is one of the oldest that we have a good photo of. Number 28.
We're on now.
Here's a wonderful photo of Paul and Betty Popinot's 1921 Dodge touring car. Up until about 1920, open touring cars like this were the most popular body types. They were also the cheapest. Those are not white wall tires. Before tire manufacturers began adding carbon black to the mix, most automobile tires were gray. Next.
We're on 29 now.
The Chubbuck family, who lived at 150 West Calaveras, owned a 1925 Essex. It was a 2-door sedan with an enclosed body like this one. Enclosed car bodies were popularized in the early 1920s. Like the Chubbuck's Essex, they were mostly boxy with square bodies. Essex competed with Chevrolet and other low-priced cars. Number 30.
Okay.
This is a major traffic jam on West Altadena Drive in October 1925. The public responded in droves to the promotion of new homes in Altadena. This one was staged by builder Elijah James. The cars in the photo are boringly similar. It's kind of hard to tell one make of car from the other.
Yeah.
Next, the family car for Oscar Holt was this high-end 1925 Marmon sedan. Oscar commuted in style from his home on North Fair Oaks to the Holt Tool and Die Company on East Walnut. Marmon was a high-priced car. Note the curved glass on the three-piece windshield. Also the chrome-plated barrel headlights and the foot guards on the running board. Although bumpers were not standard on cheaper cars, this Marmon came with deluxe two-piece bumpers. Number 32. We got it?
Yep, we got 32. Go ahead.
As Paul Popeno's family grew, the radio personality acquired a large 1930 Chrysler. This was a Chrysler Royal Model 77 four-door sedan. Extras included side mount spare tires, a cowl-mounted parking lights, and a sunshade at the top of the windshield. That's young David Popenoe posing on the front of the family car. It's parked in the driveway of their Marengo Avenue home. David was a classmate of mine from the third grade in Altadena through Elliott. Next.
Okay, we got slide 33 here.
As youngsters, my Elliott schoolmates, Bill and Curry Haynes, remember having to bundle up in a blanket when riding in the rumble seat of the family's 1930 Ford Model A coupe. Ford built almost 5 million Model A's in 1930 and 31, and I suspect that a large number of them found their way into Altadena. They were cheap, reliable, peppy, and easy to repair. Next.
Slide 34.
The popular and still popular 1932 Ford. Al Hawkins zipped all over Pasadena in his 32 Ford convertible coupe. Hawkins added smaller wheels and balloon tires and a 1941 Ford bumper, and he removed the V8 radiator cap. Between chasing and photographing news events, Hawkins occasionally joined other gearheads like me, hanging out at the Right Spot drive-in way out on West Colorado. This photo is from the late 1940s. Next. House builder Christian Peterson, who lived in the big house that still stands on the southwest corner of Marengo and Sacramento, drove an old 1933 Dodge station wagon. He gutted the interior and used it as a work car. There was nothing inside except the driver's seat. Mr. Peterson also had an old pickup truck, but he hauled long pieces of wood, window frames, and finished carpentry in this old Dodge wagon. He built fine homes, including my grandparents' home on Marengo. Number 36.
It's 36.
Dixon Chubbuck, who lived on Laurel Drive in West Altadena, owned a motorcycle dealership located on Fair Oaks near Claremont. As the business grew, Dixon moved his family into better and better automobiles. In the 1930s, he was finally able to afford this handsome 1933 Oldsmobile sedan. One rainy day, a car coming down Fair Oaks a little too fast slid on the streetcar tracks and slammed into the Oldsmobile parked in front of Chubbuck's motorcycle store. The impact bent the frame of the Oldsmobile, sending the still new car to the junkyard. 37.
Got it. Oh, wow.
Our neighbors on Highview, Otis and Margaret Thomas, owned Thomas Plumbing. They drove a 1934 Chrysler Airflow. At the time, the revolutionary Airflow was arguably the safest and best engineered car that had ever been built. It was also the ugliest. It did not sell well, and it almost put Chrysler into bankruptcy. Slide 38. This is my 1936 Ford convertible. It was 12 years old when I bought it in 1949. It was maroon, accented with a snow white top, and the spare tire mounted on the trunk also had a white cover. This 1949 photo was taken across the street from Muir in the parking lot of the Frosty Freeze on Lincoln in Wyoming. I love that car and I wish I still had it. Number 39.
There it is.
Mrs. Kerwin, a single mother who lived with her son David on Harriet near McNally, owned a 1937 Plymouth two-door sedan like this one. Note the flat one-piece windshield that has been cranked open for an early version of air conditioning. When his mother was out on a date, David got the car keys and we roared across Mariposa as fast as the old Plymouth would go. David liked to see how fast he could speed shift from first to second gear. It's a wonder any of us, including his mom's Plymouth, survived. Sticker price on a 1937 Plymouth like this started at $650. Hers did not have white wall tires. Note that the headlights are still independent bullets up there by themselves. Next slide.
Slide 40.
The pictures are back. Mr. Von Delden, who lived on Sinaloa, drove a 1941 Chrysler Windsor sedan. He was a German audio engineer who came to America in the 1930s to work on the soundtrack of Walt Disney's Fantasia. By the early 1940s, most cars had the headlights blended into the fenders, and the running boards began to disappear. Von Delden's big Chrysler featured shift-free fluid drive. Next.
Slide 41.
Luke Wood, who lived on Craig Avenue, drove a 1941 Packard sedan. Packard was a prestigious high-end car known for its excellent engineering and quality manufacturing. But Packard was slow to streamline their cars, with many models produced in the 1940s looking like they belonged in the 1930s. Note that this 1941 Packard still has independent headlights and independent lights on the fenders, parking lights on the fenders. Since Luke Wood was a banker, the conservative image of a Packard may have been to his advantage. Next slide. After the US entered World War II, manufacturing of new cars for consumers ended in February 1942. Chrome was needed for military use, and the few cars that were built, mostly for government and military use, such as this 1942 Chevrolet, had all of the usual bright work painted. In addition to the grille and trim being painted, note that the upper half of the headlight is painted black. This was mandated during the war for all West Coast cars driving at night. Next. The public anticipation for new cars after the war was insane. Most 1946 cars were just warmed over 1942 models, but people still went nuts. My grandfather, who lived on Marengo, was loyal to Nash automobiles. He bought a 1946 Nash Ambassador like this one. It was, as I mentioned, basically a 1942 car with a little extra bright trim work. A big feature promoted by Nash was the ability to convert the back seat into a double bed.
Wow.
It's for tourists, not for dating. Number 44. The Altadena taxi was a one-car outfit. It operated out of the owner's home at 2611 Raymond. You might wonder why I know some of these addresses. It's something that a newspaper guy, delivery boy, sort of gets used to.
Yeah.
I don't remember what kind of car the taxi was in the early 40s, but after the war, the Altadena taxi was a slick-looking 1947 Packard Clipper. Pretty fancy for a one-car taxi company.
Yeah.
Next. Frank Bauman, who lived on Glenview Terrace, drove a 1947 Oldsmobile like this. Oldsmobile was priced in the mid-range, just under Buick. The big deal on many post-war cars was that the front fenders extended into the door panels. For several years, Oldsmobile Oldsmobile used a variation of this bold, frowning grille. Next. The 1947 Studebaker was one of the most dramatically different post-war cars. Conceived by famed industrial designer Raymond Loewy, the wraparound rear window and long trunk made you wonder which way the car was going. The straight-laced father of classmate Jerry Hill surprised his family when he brought home this new 1947 Studebaker Starlight Coupe. Next. This 1948 Cadillac sedan was owned by Elliott general science teacher Hal Rowley. This was the car that introduced tail fins to the automotive world. This big, super comfortable car weighed 5,000 pounds. Today's Cadillac sedan weighs in at 3,700 pounds, almost a full ton less. Next. The 1950 Mercury was an instant hit. It became a favorite with street rod fans who saw great potential in modifying the beautiful Mercury body. Muir's school buddies, Bill Haynes and Eddie Von Delden, both owned 1950 Mercuries. The 49, 50, and 51 Mercury are still popular with the custom car crowd. Next, the 1951 Hudson Hornet, driven by Elliott classmate Jeannie Carr's father, Ernest, featured a step-down design in which passengers rode inside the frame. Hudson used the same body with the modified front end from 1948 through 52. The Carrs, who lived on West Palm, owned a neighborhood grocery store on Hill Street, just north of Walnut. Next. Jackie Wirch, the youngest of the Wirch family who lived on Mount Curve Avenue, owned a 1956 Austin Healey Sprite. The original design had retractable headlights, but it was decided the mechanism was too expensive to include on production cars. The result was the bug-eyed look that became the Sprite's signature. Jackie was petite and the little British sport car suited her perfectly. In addition to private cars, there were several interesting commercial vehicles that ventured into Altadena. Next. In the early 1940s, when I lived on Marengo, one of the mobile vendors that came around the neighborhood was the vegetable man. The majority of women were stay-at-home housewives, and the curb service saved them a trip to the store. In most cases, the fruits and vegetables were both cheaper and fresher than what was available at the chain grocery stores. Items were weighed on a scale hanging at the rear of the truck. Next. A favorite memory of many Altadenans was the unusual looking Helms Olympic bakery truck that came around the neighborhood once or twice a week. Long shelves at the back of the pale yellow truck could be pulled out to display all kinds of cakes and pastries. The Helms breadman announced his arrival with a distinctive whistle that was powered by a vacuum line from the engine. Next. Ador Farms used Divco trucks for home delivery of milk, butter, eggs, and other dairy products. This early Divco model could be driven from either side of the vehicle. Rather than using a wheel, the truck was steered with a tiller. In this picture, the driver has his hand on the gear shift and his foot on the clutch. The owner of Ador named his dairy business by reversing the name of his wife, Rhoda. And lastly, number 54, the arrival of the Good Humor truck was always welcome, especially for families that still used an icebox or did not have a freezer compartment in their refrigerator. We've looked at 24 vehicles that folks get around in Altadena, and the book includes 3 vehicles if you're interested in taking a peek at it. I understand that the book, the next slide, is available will be available at the Historical Society when that reopens, and we're preparing another copy for the library. That concludes my little talk.
That's great. Thank you very much. That was wonderful. Yeah, as Richard just mentioned, the book that he's written it will be in our archives. I actually have it here in my house right now, but it'll be up in the archives. The archives are closed to the public until the county decides to reopen for us, and that is hard to tell when that's going to happen, but it will be announced as soon as possible, and it will be available for anyone to come in and view. We only have one copy. It is not available for purchase or anything, but I had, if you all have questions, if you could submit them on the chat menu, that would be great. I had one that came up quickly as you mentioned all the tracks, the railroad tracks that went around your neighborhood. You arrived in Altadena in about 1940, and I wondered if you remembered any of the tracks still there, or if you remember them being torn up, or were you too young to see?
Yes, the tracks. My first trip to Altadena was in 1939, and then in 1940 we moved here permanently. But many of the tracks were still around, and some of the requirement for a franchise holder, a transportation franchise holder, was that you had to operate a car, at least one car a day, even on an abandoned line. So service stopped, but the tracks on Fair Oaks, as I recall, were not pulled up until late 1940, and pardon me, late 1941. And the tracks on Mariposa stayed for quite a while. In fact, I mentioned that one of the new services in Altadena was a bus that came up Los Robles and then continued on up Calaveras, Santa Anita. Now, logically, that bus should have gone up to Mariposa and made a U-turn there.
Yeah.
But Mariposa still had the tracks down the middle. So the poor bus driver had to struggle and make a U-turn on Calaveras. They did use a slightly shorter bus on that Santa Anita line.
Yeah, I was going to say that's Calaveras and Santa Anita is not a very wide intersection. So that
it was a struggle.
Yeah, very good. Yeah.
So yeah, some of the tracks were still there, but then there was such a an intense drive to gather metal for the war effort that the tracks and the overhead wires were all quickly pulled up.
Yeah, yeah, I could imagine. Right, that was gone in a hurry. And yeah, people were getting, and there were more and more cars in the 30s, I guess, too. There was a question about YouTube. This presentation will be available on YouTube through our website, and we'll be sending out a link on our monthly emails. We'll make it available as soon as possible. And it's also suggested on our chat board here. Richard wrote a wonderful book about his growing up in Altadena, which covers some of the same materials. Richard is quite a gearhead. He has a lot of pictures of cars in that book and stories about growing up and working on cars and driving cars around Altadena. And it is available on our website, and we have copies in our archives as well. If you would go to that, there's a link that has been posted to if you wanted to buy one of those yourself. And let's see, anything else I can think of? Yeah. Oh, I wanted to mention too that the railroad right-of-way, the LA Terminal Railway that you mentioned that came across on Harriet, it looks like there are some remains of the old right-of-way along Harriet near the bottom of McNally and Highview, where there's some embankments on the southern side, and even over on Berry Street. I was looking at that too. There's some embankments that look a little suspicious to me, and I was, since I read about it in your book, I went over there myself to take a look. It looks interesting to see it that. And here's a question from William Lyons. I tried to follow the right-of-way of the Altadena Steam Railroad. Me too, William. I've done that too. I like looking for that stuff. It seems to have terminated at the site of the Altadena Post Office. Is that correct?
At the Altadena what?
Post Office? That's just north of the Lake Avenue and Calaveras shopping center now.
I'm not familiar with that location. It terminated just south of where the power station is.
Okay. So a little south of the post office. Okay,
And there were two tracks where it was a single track line, but there
Right.
were two tracks there and a small shed. And that's where the Mr. Green and Mr. McNally parked their private cars.
oh, over that far, okay.
Yeah, and their homes, of course, faced Mendes.
Yeah, yeah, they face the track on the south side. And I have heard that there was some track was uncovered on the north. I guess this would have been the original Mount Low Railway track on the north side of that current brick powerhouse that turned off and went up north on Lake. But
Yes.
yeah, yeah, but yeah, okay. Well, hopefully we answered that question. Yeah, the old right of way of that LA terminal thing has a few traces left in Altadena. There's another trace left near the off ramp of the 210 freeway at Lincoln.
Oh, is there?
Traces of it left running north and south, just about a block east of Windsor Drive. You can find that running under the power lines there. So
Oh,
to
interesting.
go explore that. But let's see, do we have any more questions? Yeah, isn't it strange that streetcars went along Mariposa, making a lot of noise all day long for the millionaires who lived on that street? And yeah, living next to a railroad nowadays wouldn't be considered all that prestigious, but in those days, I guess that's the only way to get around.
Well, I must say that a streetcar, even the big red cars, are quieter than today's buses.
Are they?
And
Or were they?
also, it's always been my feeling that a lot of the homes on Mariposa, they were the back door, because those homes were really facing south and were on Mendocino. Now that may have changed later. They may have
Yeah,
switched them around. But the point that I wanted to was that up until 1941, Mariposa was not a broad, wide highway. It
Mhm.
was a narrow one-way lane on each side of the tracks.
right. It was mostly a railway. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
But
but
I
it
guess
was quiet. The streetcars were not noisy. They were
Right.
relatively quiet.
Well, they were electric, so yeah, it would make sense, right?
Yeah.
And you're right. A lot of the homes were opened to the south because in the old days there weren't as many trees, and the views of the valley and even to Catalina were much easier to make then.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it looks like I don't see any other questions coming up here, but this has been a wonderful presentation. I want to thank you for putting all this together, and thank you again to Chloe, our librarian, who has been managing all this. There's another, Chloe's just posted another link on the chat, and there's something there. It's let's see. Yeah, there we go. So take a look at the links if you'd like on the chat. We'll leave it open for a little while, but thank you everyone for attending. And we'll have another online presentation coming up in about 3 months. So thank you all. And save the links if you want them. I'll leave them up here for a little bit longer. But thank you, Dick. That has been great.
Great. Thank you for having me. Enjoyed it very much.
All right.
Good night.